So we're going to talk a little bit about how, one, first of all, your blue team, red team activity is similar to what threat actors do out in the world. Why should you pay attention or consider at least using threat intelligence, focusing on threat actor activity as a way to have a positive net gain in your in-house applications? And there's a bunch that comes along with those strategies, and then we'll do some takeaways, and we'll have time for Q&A. This is a fairly short session with a lot of activity and content to cover, so I will do my best to keep it timely so we can address questions as you may have them towards the end. So as you all would imagine if you're sitting here at this particular moment, that in order for you to test to secure a network and secure your operational domain against real threats, you have to simulate testing. You have to do simulation-based testing that really makes it look like you are under threat, because not applying an attack scenario to your defense program is a strong flaw, well understood in our industry, because there are certain things that you're very likely to miss if you break everything down in vulnerability testing part by part, and everything's segmented and everything's taken its time. You also creates an issue with load testing on an environment, or just a confusion of potential defense mechanisms. All these things can come into play when you don't pay attention to testing under attack principle. I keep going back to this term. I've been in the military for a long time here, and there's this thing that we it's been an army-wide saying for 1,000 years, and it's you train as you fight. And the idea is that you want to put as much stress and duress in training, because when you are really in the fight of it, you're going to default to your training. You're going, your kind of lizard brain, for lack of better terms, takes over, right? Your subconscious takes over, and you're going to default to your training. So your training needs to be really top notch. And in cyber, it's no different. That's why it's important to test incident response plans. That's why it's important to do tabletop exercises and all those things, because that's how you put cyber stress without the real stakes on leadership. But that's an easy way, kind of an easy task to accomplish, as long as you can get your leadership on board and everyone sees the value in it and understands it, and you have the right protocols in place. You can conduct that kind of training in a few hours. And if you do it a couple times a year, a few times a year, you're going to have a sharp leadership who can react. However, when you break that down to the actual domain, it's not that simple. You can't just do 3 hours of testing and assume that that's enough, and that you're going to cover everything you need in order to be safe. So that principle is embedded at what I'm talking about today, which is why I'm spending so much time going into it, because I think it's key to understanding the rest of what we're going to talk about. Okay. And in the real world, threat actors are out there, and they're doing amazing things, really, in all reality, with what they have. And it's important to also remember a second principle here that's that's important, is that we can learn from threat actors. Even though they're criminals, or and they're doing the wrong thing, it's a special kind of criminal, right? Somebody that robs a purse in the real world has unlikely the same skill sets comparative to a legitimate way of earning a living the way that a cyber criminal has, right? Cyber criminals, if they decided to use their knowledge for good, they would be, they'd be SOC analysts. They would be, directors of incident response. They would be, a cloud architect. They would be, cyber defense architects. They'd be web developers. They have it's those skill sets that, when used for bad, makes them threat actors. The thing is, they have certain advantages that most of us don't have, and we're going to talk about that today. And that's all forms the why this concept is so important to talk about, because right now, as I'm sure you all know, if we were in a real room and I could see hands coming up, I'm sure if I asked how many people are using some sort of AI agent or agentic AI tool, most hands in the room would come up, especially in this crowd. And it's become kind of a norm already so quickly. And it's crazy to say that something as fast as how the current AI tools that we have available is part of the norm, because the timeline is so fast. But it's kind of the norm that everyone uses AI on their day-to-day basis at work now. And that shouldn't be really in some ways any different on the security realm if you're doing it, if you're using it properly, of course. So um, let's talk a little bit about the threat actor activity we're seeing out there, and then how it relates to you, right? You have a need to build your defense strategy. You need to know your basics. You need to have an incident response plan. You have to have advanced, especially at enterprise level, you're going to have advanced security considerations into place. So that's going to be your expert support. That's going to be, down to a tertiary level. That's going to be, tertiary support internally. That's going to be complete disaster planning. That's going to be, end of line considerations, which can become an incident response issue, right? Because if you have end of line hardware, software that you're dealing with, they will inevitably become a vulnerability. So all of that has to be considered. And where your micro, SME business is unlikely to take some of those more advanced considerations about defense strategy into place, it's certainly common in enterprise. I make the argument that it should be common everywhere. But we got to also think about real world and what does the single sole proprietor business thinks of, and how likely are they to be able to have the resources to bring support in that's going to think about some of these things that they're not well positioned for. So, but you folks as the security practitioners, you need to be thinking about all of these things, right? Either because you're working internally in an org, whether you're at the SOC level, or whether you're in an InfoSec team that's looking at network telemetry, whatever it is that you're doing. If you're a student, then you should be thinking about these things because you're looking to go into the workplace. Therefore, you need to show how you add value to the org as you interview, because that's that's kind of the core of what you're doing as an applicant. And if you're already somewhat senior in your space, you should be hopefully thinking about these things already. And if you're not, I plead you to please start thinking about all of these things holistically, because it's incredibly important, especially nowadays where the threat actors are becoming more and more automated as they continue to use AI tools and to gain faster automation and gain faster lethality in their ability to attack your environment. Um, one of the things that threat actors are also doing is that they have all of these same outlooks, right? Because again, remember, they have the same core skill sets that you do. So they are also planning. They also have their basic strategies. They also have their own plans. I can guarantee you, I'm speculating here, but I can guarantee you that a lot of large ransomware groups are certainly sharpening their incident response plans after law enforcement has successfully infiltrated some of them or compromised some of them in the last year. I'm sure that these organizations are thinking, okay, well, if we have an incident ourselves, how do we keep it from, how do we keep ourselves from looking bad, or from having data leakage, or from this impacting our business? Because these criminal enterprises aren't necessarily that. They're enterprises. So they act as a business for criminal purposes. So you can learn from them by reading articles online, by looking at intelligence reports that law enforcement put out or that security research organizations are putting out, and you should use that information to help you build or improve your defense strategies. One of the other common things that you folks should be thinking about here is you have a need for innovation and you have a need for accuracy. In the defense realm, everything we do has to have a certain level of accuracy, and it's a pretty high bar of accuracy, because if your solutions that you're implementing don't land, it's not a potential sale that you may miss, which even in the sale like world it can be material, but you can always come kind of take another crack at it. Not always in cyber defense. If you implement a security defense into your network or in your environment, and it's not something that was done with a higher degree of accuracy, so you did not configure it to the best way that it should be configured, or you didn't ensure implementation across every endpoint in the network, which we often see with EDR deployment in our clients who find themselves victims of cybercrime. They thought that they deployed with accuracy, and it happens that it wasn't, and maybe 5% or 6% of systems didn't properly have critical software deployed on them, and those, you can guarantee that those are the systems that the threat actor used to get their way into the network. So accuracy is super high. And the threats are always evolving. They always have been. Therefore, you have a need to innovate. You have to figure out what's going out there in the market, so you can, from a threat perspective, so your defenses can meet that threat when the time comes. Well, the threat actors have also a need for innovation and accuracy, right? Because they have a need to penetrate. They have a need to break in. So they have to figure out how to do it. And if you're going to do it as a criminal enterprise, as a business, then you have to do it in the most scalable way, the most efficient way, which requires automation, requires accuracy, requires redundancy, all the same things that you need in defense from an organization perspective. So there are parallels there, which are critical for you to be understanding and to think about, because ultimately you can, unless you're a very select organizations, your resources are likely going to be quite finite. Therefore, especially, there's always a battle. You can ask any CISO about, what their interactions are with the business entity and the business leadership when it comes to financial resources, manpower resources, and any resources in general, to advance cyber defense programs. And the vast majority of them are going to tell you that there's at least some level of friction, if not downright pain points in being able to gain resources. So with that being said, you have to get really creative, when you have these limitations that can be unique to your business, or they can be pretty typical, right? Again, most businesses don't have infinite resources. Therefore, you're going to have a budget, and sometimes new things happen, right? The new AI tool comes out there that really makes deep fakes easy, or allows for threat actors to proliferate malware in a more automated fashion, and you need to be able to defend about that, and that may not have been in your budget. So your cyber defense leadership is going to have those typical conversations about how to overcome limitations, but at the same time, you may have to innovate and figure out how to deploy something in the space accurately in a way that it will put a security, raise the bar of security across your entire space. So continue in this mindset that we're having a conversation here, right? I heard this quote the other day on the Lex Luthor podcast. He was interviewing, I forget the gentleman's name, but he runs operations at Epic Games. They make Fortnite and some of those really popular games. I'm sure you all probably heard of Epic. And there was a quote about pirates drive innovation. And in that concept, they were talking about, streaming of video games and streaming of movies, and how the old days of like torrenting and the Pirate Bay and all that stuff from back in the day, that some of you who, if I have, folks in their younger, sub 20 years old here on the crowd, some of you may not be as familiar with those environments, but they were very popular back then. And it's how a lot of people pirated music, or movies and all sorts of stuff, right? But once legitimate organizations like Epic and Steam came along, they were able to make it easy enough for the consumer that made the piracy no longer worth it. However, it's the folks that were out there that kept evolving the ease of use and the efficiencies models of these illegitimate ways of giving access of certain things to consumers, that led to that practice to staying alive. And the principle, I think, was so true, that pirates and piracy drives innovation, and that's such a key thing. And I thought about that immediately, started thinking about how that so true in our world of incident response and of cybersecurity. I'm constantly reading articles, and so are everyone around us, that we're seeing novel activities. It's threat actors using jailbroken chat GPTs, or it's random AI tools, worm GPTs, and other tools out there that are being created by threat actors trying to use open source code, open source languages to help create their own LLM to then help them proliferate phishing scams or whatever it is that, there's so many different examples out there. But the thing is, but I think one of the most key concepts here is we talked about how you're going to have typical limitations, like budget, which are not going to be finite. You're going to have, testing implementations, right? In organizations, we can't just say, oh, here's this shiny new tool. Let's deploy it and figure out what it does in our environment. Like, that's not acceptable in an organization, right? You have to, that's why we have patch programs, even for, for updates. It's why we have testings and sandboxes. We have to test everything before we roll it out to our users. Pirates don't have to do that. A threat actor can just try a new tool on a victim today, right now, and if it doesn't work, they can make changes and they can try the the revised version, 2.0 on the next potential target, and they can try 2.1 on the next potential target, and so on and so forth. You don't have those abilities, right? And most organizations, unless you're a really large enterprise, you don't have the sandbox environment either to just the human resources to just keep testing stuff over and over and over again for the sake of innovation, for the sake of figuring out, does this work better? Is this is this tool running more efficient? Is this eating up more compute? What is this going to do to our user experience if we deploy it in its current state? You can only do so much of that testing. At some point, someone's going to say, hey, we have a deadline. We have to deploy this by XYZ date, or, you have 5 other tasks that you have to accomplish. Therefore, you don't have the bandwidth to, spend more time on that particular thing you want to test. And so the threat actors have that advantage. And so they're always going to continue to innovate. And that's obviously because they have monetary gains, right, from their illegitimate activities as the driver and as the driving force and the fuel to keep them innovating, and it's part of their personalities as well. And you're going to want to innovate and you need to innovate, but you're going to have more limitations than they are. So keep that in mind. I think that's one of the biggest things that I wanted to bring up as a concept during today's conversation, is this idea that the threat actors are going to innovate, and they're likely going to innovate faster than any organization will be able to innovate when it comes to attack and security, which are, as you know, go hand in hand, right? We always talk about blue red team or red blue team, not just red team ops or just blue team ops. It's very rare for you to only do for you to only consider one side of things, and that should be for obvious reasons, right? It creates blinders, it creates inefficiencies, it creates blind spots, things that you don't want to have when you're securing an environment, right? Now, if you're in a very large org, of course, you may be part of just the red team or just the blue team, but you're always going to talk to each other post a simulation. You're going to have interactions. You're going to know what the other team is doing for the most part, because you're all one team, and knowing how applying attack techniques as part of defense is critical to your overall defense, which is the ultimate goal of any infosec or cybersec entity that's doing legitimate work, right? It's more defensive in nature. So threat actor fuel here for you guys, right? We've already talked a little bit about this. Our threat intelligence, our claims data, meaning like cases that we see, a bunch of activity showing that threat actors are really at the bleeding edge of activity right now. When it comes to utilizing AI tools for attack, and sometimes even possibly you could use the same things for directly for defense without some major like reengineering. But we're seeing jailbroken versions of tools. We are seeing tools, LLMs being used to create, to kind of end the language gap. There's often been a language gap, especially for US victims, where threat actors originate in another part of the world, and so they are trying to communicate to a victim to perpetrate their phishing activity. So they're trying to communicate with that victim in English, and it's sometimes fairly obvious that their English isn't so great, and that's often a giveaway, right? I can't tell you over the last decade plus how many cyber trainings I've sat in, whether in organizations that I belong to, including even the military, where when they point to phishing activity, they're often pointing to grammar and syntax and just English language errors that a native speaker is less likely to make, as this is a signal of threat actor activity. And that's not, not only is that not a great thing to rely on, because any given person can gain mastery of language, but nowadays it's completely unreliable, because you can have ChatGPT just write you a message, or even a jailbroken tool will write you a more nefarious message that a non-jailbroken tool will have its security parameters put a stop on such request. But you can easily craft a message that sounds very native in basically any language now, and threat actors are absolutely using that, which means that now your training of the personnel needs to shift to address that, because you have to look at different things. You can't just rely on language itself. Um, so that's some activity that we are seeing out there, right? Often organizations have, and then, sorry, before I go into this next thing, to finalize this point of bleeding edge activity, we've also have seen reports of threat actors using LLMs to create, to help, like, to essentially, I don't know if you guys have heard of the term vibe coding, but it's basically using AI to assist you in actually building a specific, a specific code structure. And we're certainly seeing activity and reports of threat actors vibe coding malware, with jailbroken tools. So they're utilizing these tools to help fine tune why their specific credential harvester isn't deploying right, or why it's not taking on the lateral movement commands that it's supposed to be taking on automatically. So threat actors are using AI to dissect the bugs on their tooling, and also to help enhance the efficacy of the features in their code. So that's act. You should try to make yourself aware of these things. Read the publications on it that are out there, because that will help you inform you of how AI, one, can be used even likely internal for your own projects, but also have an idea of the kind of tools that threat actors are using, because knowing the tools that the attacker is going to use is going to help you erect the proper defenses within your constraints to be able to defend against those specific tools. Another thing is outsourcing knowledge, right? Just about every organization out there, at some point, you're outsourcing part of what your defenses are, whether it's, you're running, a well-known EDR tool in your environment. You didn't build that, right? You're outsourcing that knowledge. You're outsourcing that defense capability to another organization's tool, or whether you're outsourcing the incident response aspect of it, because you don't have a large infosec environment, or you have a large infosec environment, but you're such a large enterprise that no matter what, you need to have an IR provider and retainer because of a catastrophe type event, where you're going to need external help. So pretty much everyone out there is outsourcing something, some sort of resource of knowledge, when it comes to their cyber operations and their defenses. Threat actors sometimes do that too. We see a lot of work of threat actors in forums engaging with each other, regarding what they're testing, how they're deploying, how they're garnering, um, essentially storing or retrieving information from victim environments. You should understand that these operations, and seek to gain more information and stay on top of it, because I could have spent this entire webinar talking about just what we're seeing out there, but that's only going to cover what we're seeing to date. So the point here is, again, continue innovation. You have a need to innovate. So I want to present these mostly, these ideas and principles to you, to help you understand how important it is to think about these things and gain more information about it, so you can take this back and make this part of your operations, that you continuously that you keep learning, and that you continuously apply these principles of innovation in defense, so you can best protect yourselves, because new information is coming in, by the minute. So you have to be able to understand these things in principle, so you can apply it in your day-to-day lives and not just be taking in direct content. All right, so keep that in mind. um, Again, so use threat actor information and reports of threat actor activity, especially anything regarding IOCs or indicators of compromise that you may see from past attacks, as a way to outsource your knowledge points. If you hear in the news or in some publication of any major organization that's similar to yours, if you can find out from tech reports any sort of information regarding IOCs or TTPs, or any sort of tactical information about the attack, or telemetry data about the attack, absolutely make that part of your defense mechanisms, right? Make that part of your strategy, because that is gold. That is live, real world information that you may or may not be able to produce with your in-house blue team, red team. And if anything, it will confirm to your your in-house blue or red team operations, that if they are already doing those things, that they are doing the things that threat actors are doing. And that's the right things to do, right? Because if you're trying to defend against a threat actor, if you're testing with the same techniques they're testing, and your defenses can handle it, then that's accuracy, right? That's accuracy of in strategy. That's accuracy. And then again, use all this information to maximize your efforts within your constraints. As we mentioned, most organizations don't have huge threat intelligence, teams in-house, and unless you have a very robust um, relationship with some sort of MSSP or technical provider that is feeding you threat intel, um, you're likely going to have a lot of constraints in your ability to learn what's happening in the wild. So it's very, very important that, one, you focus your time in, in credible publications that have a long standing of detailed information, of accurate information, and of, for lack of better terms, novel information, right? Up to date, the newest stuff. And you're not just reading the kind of the same thing over and over again. There's so many articles with different names that are just saying the same thing over and over again. And yes, of course, there's a reason for that, right? People receive and internalize information differently. People have the right and should be getting good information and out there. So you're gonna get a lot of different flavors. But at the same time, if you're the person looking to bring that information in to use it, there's almost too much information. So you have to be very careful about, as you're spending time learning more about what's going on out there from a threat perspective, that you're doing so with what your goals are in mind. Whatever your security goals, let your be goal driven. Let your goals and your constraints drive you. Hey, I only have, my small whatever size person team only has 10 hours in a month to devote to threat intel. Where can we go that we're going to get some of the best bang for your buck? And organize yourselves in that way, because those constraints are not always going to be something you can move. So you have to be able to maximize your operations to fit that. Okay. And then make them actionable items, right? So that's probably one of the other biggest things here. If you are really honed in on what kind of information, what kind of security gaps you're hoping to learn more about, or what kind of attack strategies or defense strategies you think right now you're hoping to learn more about, and you're going to very intentionally spend time doing intelligence work to understand what's going on in market, whether it's getting out on dark web and spending times in forums, whether it's scraping activity, whether it's just sometimes article reading or something of that sort, and just informing yourself through publications. There's so much out there in threat intel, and again, we could spend an entire hour talking about that, so I'm not going to give some exhaustive list here. But if you're going to spend your super valuable time focusing on the information you're bringing in, it, as I mentioned, yes, absolutely, that information should be tailored to your goals, but you have to also run it by a second filter. And that second filter is, can I do something with this? Is it actionable? If it's something that's completely theoretical, sometimes there's value in that. Absolutely, of course. A lot of what we're talking about here is theory, right? And there's value in this information. So a lot of principle thinking and goals is very valuable, because it sets your policy, right? It sets your policy, sets your kind of your guidance at the highest level of your programs and your defenses. But and that's a way, and that's actionable, of course, if you're bringing information and it's changing your policies, it's changing your outlooks, it's changing your plans. That's absolutely, I would say, that fits within actionable. But don't forget that that's not the only way that information can be actionable. It can also be actionable in your actual testing. So make sure that you are bringing in information and that you're focusing your intelligence towards goal-driven, actionable items. Because if you have 10 hours to spend on this, and you spend 8, and those 10 hours get used, get spent, and from that you get a policy change, you get a plan, a few changes made to a plan, and you actually get information that changes the strategy of your testing or tools that you're using in your testing because of what new information that you learn. That's success. That's absolutely success, because that you can measure now that you were able to put in place things that raise the bar of your security through the work you're doing, of learning more and using intelligence to guide your actions. With that being said, we're getting close to being a bit of time here. So, I want to re-emphasize some takeaways, because a lot of what we talked about today is deeply rooted in principle, and it can really drill down deep. But there are some things that you should absolutely think about over and over again, and if you're thinking about the content that we're discussing here. Your defenses require up-to-date knowledge of threats, attacks, and defense techniques. Threat actors lead the way in innovation because they don't have the regulatory constraints, they don't have corporate constraints, because their activity is often for the sake of earning money directly, and they don't have shareholders, or they don't have a wide body of employees to pay, and benefits and things of that sort. They have whatever their revenue is what their revenue is, and they're splitting that. Therefore, they likely have a lot more free time to be able to spend, in innovation, where you will likely not, because you will have goals and tasks and KPIs that your organization puts on you, that you have to accomplish in order to, quote unquote, do your job. So remember that that's a reason why you should be looking to threat actors for information that powers your defense apparatus. And if you're a savvy infosec team, those those knowledge gains should be used for your defensive operations and your testing. And that's when we talked about the actionable stuff, right? And I put a sub bullet there that applies to organizations that don't have threat intelligence in-house, because I feel like that's an important thing to drill down on. If you're a medium-sized organization, or you're a slightly larger size organization, you have an infosec team or an IT team, whatever it is that you call it, right? And but you don't have anyone that's dedicated to threat intel. One, you should consider perhaps having more time spent on threat intelligence. However, if that's completely outside of your constraints, leverage leverage your outside knowledge pools, right? Leverage your outside resources. Do you have an MSSP? Do you have contractors that perhaps support you in defenses? Do you have relationships there that can help you gain information that will fine tune your testing or that will fine tune your planning? That will help you drive perhaps what your asks are as a security team to the business leads who control the resources. Can you get information that you can use to say, hey, we need more resources next year or next quarter because of XYZ? That's how you need to communicate that in order to grow your program or ensure that your program is getting the adequate amount of attention and resources that it needs in order to be successful in defending against the threats that we see out there. Those are really the big principal takeaways that I think are key here. Again, remember, this is a quickly evolving world. There were some metrics and some other things that we learned just this last few days that I would have put here in the deck prior to prior to the session, but we just learned this information. We are learning every single day about what's going on out there, different ways that threat actors are leveraging AI, or whether it's in the things that I talked about, such as creation of tooling, or the enhancement of tooling, or the deploying of tactics. It's being used across the board. And I just learned a metric that it was crazy. Well, crazy is a strong word, but it was really intriguing. And that was also how the number of organizations and people in organizations that report the use of AI tools without consent of the organization. I'm not going to say that that's necessarily an insider threat, because that's a very strong word to use, but boy, is it close. The unsanctioned use of certain tools can really hike up the risk parameters within your organization. So you folks on the security side have to look how to implement these very useful tools that your staff wants and needs in order to be the most efficient they can be. And therefore your organization needs in order to be the most efficient that it can be. How do you empower your people, but at the same time you do so with security in mind? And these tools right now are so attractive to people because they can bring such efficiency that it is absolutely pushing everyday folks to bypass some of their training and to start using tools that they shouldn't be using within your environments. And that can lead to vulnerabilities. So keep that in mind. The number I saw was something like 58% of people responded that they're using these tools. And that was something across like 72% of organizations that were polled. Those are huge numbers. Those are absolutely huge numbers. The idea that more than half of an organization is using unsanctioned tooling that can create a vulnerability, whether it's privacy risk because of the information you're feeding it, or that is just downright, a weak point in the software that then allows a threat actor to penetrate or conduct RCE activities in your environment. That's a nightmare. So, keep that stuff in mind. These are brand new threats that are emerging so fast that we weren't even able to I wasn't even able to update the deck to talk to you guys about it. But I wanted to take a minute to bring that out there as new stuff that we're seeing, as part of it, just to help maximize some of the value that we're bringing to you here today.